Chapter 5, Section 1 notes here, human inheritance, pretty much talking about the same thing that our guided reading notes did, but adding a little more to it. So, we have what is called patterns of human inheritance. This is when some human traits are controlled by a single gene with 2 alleles. Some traits are controlled by a single gene with multiple alleles. And then some traits are controlled by many genes that act together. If you remember with our Punnett squares, when we first learned about them, we were just looking at one set of letters, but sometimes it was a dominant letter and a lowercase letter, recessive. That's just that single gene. We were only looking at that single trait. Blood type is one that has multiple alleles, so there's 3 letters involved, A, B, and O. And then, like our guided reading note said, with hair color, skin color, it's multiple genes that affect it. So a single gene with 2 alleles, these are traits that are controlled by a single gene with 1 dominant allele and 1 recessive allele. So depending on the combination of those 2 alleles, you're going to have 2 distinctly different phenotypes, or those visible traits, visible characteristics. Okay? So again, when we practiced our Punnett squares and we looked at the fur color of a rabbit, if they had the dominant alleles, they had black fur. If it had the recessive alleles, they had white fur. So there were only those 2 different color combinations that could result because of those single genes. Okay. Then single genes with multiple alleles. This has more than 2 alleles. And so that multiple allele is defined as 3 or more forms of a gene that code for a single trait. Again, with blood type, there are 3 alleles. There's A, B, and O. So you have different combinations with that. Even though these genes can have multiple alleles, as a person, you can only carry 2 of those alleles. So it just depends on the combination that you have, but there's more variations than because you have multiple alleles to combine. Again, human blood type. We will get into human blood type and how it's set up a little bit more next week as well. Then you have traits that are controlled by many genes. The height of humans has more than 2 distinct phenotypes. People aren't just all tall or all short. We have every height in between. So that means that some of these traits show a large number of phenotypes because they're controlled by many genes, and then they act together as a group and they kind of combine all of their information to determine what your specific trait, what your height is going to specifically be. Hair color, same thing. We don't just have all black hair or all blonde hair. You have red hair, brown hair, light brown hair, dark brown hair, strawberry blonde, light blonde, dark blonde. All of those different variations are controlled by many different genes. So, our sex chromosomes then are what carry these genes that determine whether a person is male or female, and then it also determines some of the different traits we're going to receive. So the X chromosome generally carries more genes on it and controls more traits in humans than the Y chromosome does. So for these chromosomes, this last pair in our 23 pairs don't always match. So if you're a female, you have 2 X chromosomes. If you are a male, you have 1 X chromosome and 1 Y chromosome. And then the Y chromosome is much smaller. It doesn't carry as many genes on it, so it doesn't need to be as big. and the X chromosome has more of those genes and more of that information built in. So then, because we have our sex chromosomes, the X and the Y, we have sex-linked genes, which are specifically on those two chromosomes. And within those genes, we have specific traits that we can inherit. One of those traits is color blindness. And this is where a person can become a carrier then. So color blindness is a trait controlled by the recessive allele on the X chromosome. So more males have color blindness than females because they only have that one X chromosome. So a carrier is a person who has one recessive allele for a trait and one dominant allele. And the carrier doesn't necessarily have to have that trait. But a carrier can pass the trait on to his or her offspring. Generally, females are carriers. If not all females are carriers of a trait if they have it, because they have the ability to have that dominant and recessive allele on their chromosomes, but not actually have the trait. The last thing then, the effects of environment. A person's characteristics are determined by the interaction between genes and the environment. So your genes do control traits, just like we know several genes control a person's height, but then environmental factors can also influence if we like increase our height or we like stunt our growth and our height and we don't actually reach the potential of what we could be. So diet is one of those, again, based on if you get the right nutrients or not, if you're eating healthy, getting the rest you need, and all of that. Environmental factors can also affect human skills, such as playing a musical instrument. So like you might have better muscle coordination or a good sense of hearing. That's gonna help you be more successful in those skills. Once you have your notes filled out, please make sure you get them submitted, and then you are good to go with those.